Hello and welcome to another episode of the Thom and Joe show. I am Tom.
I'm Joe.
So, today we are talking about perhaps one of the most famous bands, not only in hard rock, not only in heavy metal, but probably just generally in the world. We are talking about Iron Maiden. We are talking about Iron Maiden's 17th album in their illustrious and storied 40-year career, Senjutsu, which roughly translates as Tactics and Strategy from Japanese, and is a double album released earlier this month in September. And,
Okay.
and here we go. And so once again I am subjecting Joe to my tastes in music.
And that's fine. Just a little bit on my history with Iron Maiden. They have mostly just been a reference in the first Bill and Ted movie to me. Like when you're 18 to 20 years old and you're listening and watching everything and just, trying to sort out what you like. I did listen to a bit of Iron Maiden. They weren't really my thing. And I couldn't tell you why, because when you're 18 and 20, you don't know why. You just, most of the time you just do or do not like things. And now that I've been like kind of reunited and listening to, I kind of sorted it out. Now, Iron Maiden absolutely deserves their legacy. I am not going to step on anything Iron Maiden has done. They are musical geniuses. They are a perfectly great band. They are just not for me because of, it's a weird, complicated mix of things. I think the best way I can put it is they are very theatrical, but I come from like theatrical where you have to have like characters and kind of like a storyline and stuff like that I can emotionally go through. But Iron Maiden are more like poems and epics, and while there's like a narrator or some sort of character speaking, they don't really have a character arc. This is just about them talking a long time about war, about people fighting and dying, and more war, and the battlefields are a graveyard, everything's red, the ocean's red, the sand's red, the ground's red, everything's red, or black, or whatever color they want the ground to indicate that there was a lot of death and murder here. So that it's kind of that. But to put it the best way I can, my favorite Iron Maiden song is "Heroes" by Motorhead, and I am just some asshole on the internet, so and Motorhead and Iron Maiden were best buds with each other from what I understand. So I am just some guy saying things, but this is just a matter of preference. This is not dissing anybody, but "Heroes" is about the people who are fighting and dying, and it's probably a losing battle, but if we win, we will be legends. And that is something I connect more than what I've listened to on Iron Maiden. I've like listened to their greatest hits, and I've picked and chose a couple albums like Power Slave because it had a cool Egyptian cover. And
we'll get to the sort of general how Iron Maiden package themselves, because this is a band that requires some unpacking generally.
Yeah, because there's a lot, and you can do some of the unpacking right now if you'd like.
So let's start at the beginning. Iron Maiden are a British heavy metal band who have been going since 1975. They released their first album. They've obviously gone through multiple lineups over the past 40 nearly 50 years as various members. So essentially, Iron Maiden start as a sort of an offshoot of punk. They essentially quickly become one of the codifiers for a genre which loosely is described as the new wave of British heavy metal, which goes on to sort of influence stuff like Metallica. It basically rejuvenates what sort of bands like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple did. With sort of elements of the obviously the them burgeoning punk scene. the lineup then really coalesces but on Number of the Beast, where Bruce Dickinson is the band's vocalist off and on, as we'll go to, is brought in. The band then obviously solidified that lineup further with Nico McBrain, the drummer, who's basically been in the band ever since. Then the band basically reached their imperial phase between Peace of Mind in the 1983 and Fear of the Dark, which then ends with Dickinson and one of the band's guitarists leaving. This then leads to the Bleasley years, which nobody likes and nobody particularly cares for. Bruce Dickinson comes back to the band and brings back guitarist Adrian Smith, and they've been going ever since in pretty much that lineup. So the lineup of Iron Maiden is, because there are 6 of them, including 3 guitarists, which is Bruce Dickinson on vocals, Steve Harris, the longest and founder of the band, on bass, Dave Murray, Adrian Smith, and Janet Gears on guitar, and Nico McBrain on drums.
So it feels like this is going to be a sportscast where you're giving all the information and I'm just giving color commentary.
Precisely. A lot. Yeah. Along for the ride is obviously.
I could say, like, they are extremely influential.
Yeah.
And to the point where they probably influenced most late 80s hair metal bands that are about, because I heard some of this in bands who are just singing about like nailing a bleach blonde on a muscle car or something like that, and it's like, wow, it sounds just like that.
Yeah. Oh god, they are absolute. They are probably alongside Metallica, who frankly politely owe their existence to Iron Maiden, probably the most famous heavy metal band in the world, including an astonishing popularity in South America. They are genuinely one of the... You go to most people in South America, it is like a religion down there.
Yeah, it's like...
genuinely...
I wonder how many South American anime music videos are set to Iron Maiden with Saint Seiya.
I wonder.
Because Saint Seiya is huge down there, too.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining all these crossovers, stuff that... I mean, Iron Maiden obviously is popular everywhere, but there's stuff that isn't popular. And my ADHD is going off track and making connections, so we got to get back on track here.
That's fair enough. Obviously, along for the ride is the band's habitual mascot, Edward T. Head, who adorns the cover of sort of every single Iron Maiden album since the band's inception, and which I'm wearing a T-shirt of at the moment. So this is, it is probably alongside the Snagtooth mascot for Motorhead, probably the most famous non-band member in metal. So anyway,
okay,
I think we sort of basically let's just lay the groundwork. So this is the band's first album in 6 years since the album Book of Souls, which was basically the first of the band's sort of double albums. This is again a double album. Not quite as long as Book of Souls, and I think less baggy than Book of Souls, because Book of Souls ended with the 20-minute track about airships, because this is the sort of thing. Iron Maiden's wheelhouse is sort of, it'll be history, it's, warfare of various types, mythology, religion, and, and they basically will take I mean, on this album alone, there are songs about Native Americans, a song bizarrely enough about Constantine, in particular the Keanu Reeves version of Constantine, the Time Machine, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, and Winston Churchill. This is sort of give you some idea of the length and breadth of what Iron Maiden can and do sing about. Yeah,
and the one I remembered the most is The Trooper, because it was covered by the Proto Men, who is one of my favorite bands. But it is about fighting a robot war with muskets.
Yes, except the original one is actually about the Irish British about the Irish-British War, which is
Okay.
why they don't play it in Ireland, because this ends
Right.
up on the murals on the end of Northern Ireland buildings.
Ah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're not a band that particularly go in for politics. Bruce Dickinson, as we'll come on to sort of chat about later, is basically they. How do I describe? They are sort of like a band that sort of, they are unrepentantly British. They are, they are a band where Bruce Dickinson will run around stage carrying a Union Jack and dressed as a Spitfire pilot, but they're also, it's sort of a Britishness that exports rather well to the rest of the world.
I think it's just like the universal qualities of the
Oh
song
god,
because
absolutely,
like in this album they have like The Darkest Hour, which is about Winston Churchill, and if I didn't read it while thumbing through the lyrics, I wouldn't have known. I mean, there are just some specific things that are extremely British, and if you know things, then or if you know what Iron Maiden does at live shows, then that clues you in. But if you're like me and you're kind of a beginner at this, then you would never know. They just kind of have major themes, and the scope is extremely wide, and you have to really start picking apart, or just like listening to interviews or something to like parse exactly who and what it's about sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like for example, the track sort of Days of Future Past, which is not about the X-Men thing, but it's in fact the song about Constantine. You would never have guessed was actually about Constantine unless someone in the band had said it in an interview. Anyway, moving swiftly on. This is the first album in 6 years from Iron Maiden. Now, I need to add a little caveat with this, as we discussed before. So, the band have been sitting on this album for about 2 years. Which, I mean, in this day and age when, leaks of records are basically part for the course of an album's release. The fact that Iron Maiden have sat on this for 2 years, not mentioned this for 2 years, nothing's slipped out in an interview, nothing sort of come across. I've just gone, we're working on. Oh, we should have said that. And I think so I think that the album has to be sort of looked at in certain respects in that sort of idea that this is an album that, although it goes into things that obviously are very salient at the moment, it's the album being reasonably put. It's the album just being on the right track rather than the band writing about what's happening at the moment. Anyway, so where should we start with this? Because this is a big long record.
Yeah. Well, we'll start with like the album title, Senjutsu, which is a Japanese word for tactics and strategy, and also magic. I'm guessing that's just like a metaphor, like making magic happen on the battlefield. I'm sure.
Precisely. I mean, it's a word that previously. I mean, when the album, so there was quite a. I suppose what's the term we're looking for? It was one of these sort of really sort of treasure hunty sort of campaign when this album was sort of hinted at, which is this concept of a lot of people were seeing with with t-shirts with Balthazar's feast, which is obviously what the song Writing on the Wall is partly about, which is obviously from the Bible, and you're sort of hinting at things, and you're sort of looking at it. It's like, and when the album actually title sort of releases, it's like, Senjutsu, here is like the album cover and everything, and here's some Naruto screen caps from like 2013, because the term is obviously used in Naruto, which must have made it very confusing if you're a music journalist sort of googling for this and going, what has this got to do with Naruto, guys? This is sort of like, this is the album sort of conceit, because Iron Maiden always go in for these sort of these stylistic things. So obviously you've got Power Slaves sort of ancient Egypt sort of look, you've got The Final Frontier, which is the album previous to Because Souls, which went in for a very sort of extraterrestrials and sort of pulpy comic book look. You went for sort of Matter of Life and Death, where everything's very military themed. So this theme is obviously just the the most recent of a number of guises, and on the cover you have Eddie resplendent as apparently a 12th century samurai, rather than the samurai from the Warring States period. So you have a rather fearsome-looking Eddie that sort of replete with samurai sword, and you could when they were actually releasing this in shops, I think they are still in shops now. They're like these massive cardboard cutouts of Eddie, and it's like bloody hell, man. In a lot of record stores in the UK, and it was like blimey, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that stuck out about me is it's Senjutsu, and you think it's going to be about like Japanese stuff. It's mostly British stuff, which I think it's fine. I don't. We don't need Iron Maiden being weeboos. I mean, they do use like some things like Art of War, which is Chinese. So yeah. But
no, absolutely.
There's some.
Yeah. They've always been.
There's some things that they reference certain things in the lyrics, but mostly this is just about European war.
And it's like, Iron Maiden have always been interested in war, and there are many types of war. If I have, this is sort of just talking about the packaging. So this obviously came out in, the usual 3 billion versions of like, collector's edition, etc. If I have one thing against this album, and this is going to sound like a big nitpick in terms of the packaging, it's got that horrible sort of pseudo sort of, Asian, Chinese fast food sort of font on the front, and it's like, guys, you are a multi-billion band. You have the word stamped in Japanese on the cover. Why have you now added this that looks like it's, I don't know, that I'm about to receive, I don't know, sort of,
It's a Chinese restaurant, and everybody in the running the back are white guys.
Yeah, it's got that look, and it's like this is why like I struggled to find merchandise for this album, because I thought, fuck it, I'm gonna buy an Iron Maiden t-shirt, and it's like, but they've all got this sort of horrible Chinese, Chinese takeout look on them. Why have you done? It's my biggest nitpick with the album, honestly, which is going to sort of indicate how little problem I have with this otherwise. So you have an alternate cover that also has Eddie in sort of more geisha-ish look, because why not? It's just,
why not? I don't know.
No, I've not actually seen that cover in the wild. I can only assume it's either some alternate cover in elsewhere or whatever. It's on the back of the album well, for no apparent reason.
One of the tabs I have open is the Wikipedia page, so I'm looking right at it.
There he is, Eddie the head.
Eddie looking like Padme Amidala.
Yeah, not a flattering, not one of his best looks, sort of, not certainly. Yeah.
I mean, granted, like, once you have this, mascot for so long, they just eventually become adorable, no matter how metal they look. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, he's gone through every guy's. I mean, you could buy an action figure of him, which would indicate, what a.
Yeah. It's the Freddy Krueger effect. Like, he is an effective villain the first few movies, and then he just kind of becomes a joke because kids start to like him.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, well, kids shouldn't be watching these movies, but we'll take their money, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the packaging aside. Yeah, it's a very nicely packaged album. There's sort of deluxe editions of it. I got the standard edition because it's music, mate. I'm not hugely that interested. The contents, though. So this is a double album. It's on 2 discs. The first disc is mostly the shorter songs, and the second disc is mostly Steve Harris writing very long pieces of music, to the extent that essentially the last third of this album is entirely on the shoulders of Mr. Steve Harris in terms of writing credits.
Yeah, the Darkest Hour is Smith and Dickinson, and then Harris.
Harris, yeah. In fact, actually, Harris has all 4 of the longest tracks, because he also writes Lost in the Lost World, which is the 4th longest track on this album. This is the thing. So Iron Maiden in sort of the recent eras, I would say probably over the last 3 or 4 records, have started a particular sort of, I guess, structure to their albums, and we'll sort of go through this structure as we go through the first few tracks. So, the album starts with Senjutsu, and Senjutsu is sort of like, our very much our setting the scenes. It's our title track. It's, things are happening. This is the start of a new Iron Maiden album, and we start with drums and sort of, ominous percussion. And
the drums of war.
The drums of war, and it's sort of like it sets the scene, and they've done this for about the last three albums. So the Final Frontier started with very much the same thing. You had Satellite 15, which essentially was 4 minutes of build up, and then a normal sort of a reasonably normal Iron Maiden song, and much the same on Book of Souls, where you had the 8.5 minutes. If Eternity Should Fail, which again starts with a lot of Atmos and etc. It's the sort of thing you can imagine this translating fairly well into live. Have an extended, drum solo at the beginning, and then go, hey, we're now into playing the stuff. Mm-hmm. And I like this track. It's very good. It sets the scene. It's very much. It's the only album that really sits in the sort of this is about samurai and battles and dynasties, and what it also does, to be fair, which I think sort of really works very well in the album's favour, is it sort of sets the sort of the scene. The last couple of albums have been very sort of upfront, very this is a lot slower and a lot more contemplative, windswept. There's a lot of there is a lot of structure to this that sort of goes here is the idea of, yes, this is the typical Iron Maiden topic of a battle, but it's not a battle we're going to win. We're essentially sacrificing ourselves for dynasty pride, as the record goes. But the day of judgment's falling, and it's sort of basically, it's a typical slower Iron Maiden song. Lot of build, lot of very impressive sort of sort of musical pyrotechnics. It's all very restrained. In that sort of sense, it's a grower. It sort of goes, here is a scene that Iron Maiden via Bruce Dickinson is sort of painting you a sort of a picture of this sort of last stand. Of these sort of, I assume he implies samurai warriors. I mean, it says samurai, and then he's also referring to, nomads from the plain and sort of tribes invading.
Yeah,
and it's
it felt like he was talking about Great Britain or something,
or
Europe-y, from
China,
like how he described the lands.
Yeah, it's like,
or
yeah, not Japan, and it's like, it's like, it's very much sort of like. For an album that has a Japanese title, and this is the thing, like Iron Maiden are always going to be this very colloquially British band, that the most of their songs are either, foreign wars through a British lens, or things like, obviously, for Run for the Hills, the idea of even things like, essentially the wars against Native Americans, whilst, Dickinson and co are condemning of it, is very much from an Anglo-centric perspective, and a lot of the stuff that they sing about are either history essentially from a British point of view, or war from a British point of view, or these novels or whatever. I mean, one of the tracks on Peace of Mind, which is the first album with Nico, is about June, but. So previously, the band have only really done two works sort of leaning into Japan, which is the live album Made in Japan, which is with the band's original focus, Paul Di'Anno, and Sun and Steel, a song about 16th century samurai Miyamoto Musashi cribbing a title from Yukio Mishima. Yeah, guys, not probably the best Japanese guy to borrow titles from, but no, it sets the scene very well. It's sort of it's this very, and it's sort of Maiden have done songs about last stands, etc. before. There's a desperation, there's a windsweptness to this, and then we sort of drop into the sort of the usual. Next song on the album, which is the really fast one that sounds like it's from the 1980s, which is Stratego, which isn't to be confused with the board game of the same name, despite that being a problem. So yeah, Stratego is sort of, you know, the 1-2 punch of slow, contemplative, you know, building of mood, and, you know, fast, bass heavy, you know, sections. This is the only writing credit for Yannick Gears, who is sort of, you know, the sort of the master of these fast, heavy songs that sort of hark back to, you know, the Maiden's 80s heyday. And yeah, this is another really good one, and this is where I think our opinions are going to start to differ, though, aren't they?
Maybe. Just a couple words about the first two tracks.
Yeah,
sorry. I mean, I feel like Senjutsu really establishes like the themes of the album, which is, it feels like the big theme is reflecting on war.
Yeah.
Or just like, all of it feels like, I mean, Senjutsu is one of the few ones where it feels like the battle is happening. And then we have Stratego, where just like, it feels like the narrator is going to this person and it's like, I need to figure out the art of war, and I need to figure out how to win. But then it kind of just loses itself in, you know, the rest of the poetic Iron Maiden. But it's just like, it feels like either the battles have already been determined or they have already happened. And you have Lost in a Lost World, which is, you know, it's very clear what that's about. Days of Future Past, and, you know, the Time Machine. It's about going back and thinking on things. Or, you know, I mean, they're very... There are rare songs where it's like the battle is happening. I'm thinking the Parchment. I mean, the Death of the Kells, like, some of it is... I mean, it's a 10-minute song, so obviously there are different parts of it, but a lot of it is about talking about the graveyards of, you know, people and stuff like that. So, but, you know, going back to these two songs in particular, Senjutsu is, you know, pretty good. It's, I don't want to say standard, because it's too good to be, the music is too good to be standard, but it's like, it is a very typical curtain raiser for, like, these types of albums.
I mean, none of this stuff has actually been road tested, you know. As I said, Iron Maiden aren't due to go back on tour until, you know, next year, because, you know, COVID, obviously. But no, I can honestly imagine these two being, you know, the opening two on a set and going, here's the 1-2, bang bang, here we go. It's like, crap. You know, that's, you know, the very much the sort of thing, you know, you might get, you know, sort of, I don't know, they might whack in some samurai film samples and just say, there we go, dun 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 dun, gone. Yeah.
And let's, like, with Senjutsu and Stratego, it feels like there's a narrative being woven, like, like, here's the battle that we just lost because, like, everybody's invading from all sides and I can't do anything and we failed. And then Stratego is like, maybe this general going to talk about, teach me how the ways, and then it kind of get lost. And then next we have Writing on the Wall, which is about the apocalypse. So there goes that narrative. But
there goes, absolutely. I mean, Stratego is this sort of, you know, this fast, propulsive. It is also the second shortest track on the album and is still nearly 5 minutes long, which would indicate the sort of the scale of this album. And it sort of very much harks back to the sort of the more traditional Iron Maiden sound, this sort of very bass heavy, you know, very jig 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 jig, you know, that galloping style that basically everyone in the universe has copied off Steve Harris. But no, it's sort of
absolutely
like, it's like, but it's sort of, you know, it's sort of, I feel this sort of this works very well as sort of the flip side, you know, the other single which released for this album. There is a video for this, I found out today, which is sort of, you know,
I didn't have time to watch it because you just sent it to me at like 4 a.m. last night, and
it's like, it's alright.
I had to run errands.
It's fine. It's basically just like this whole sort of fantasy conflict, and then it pulls back and it's Eddie playing shogi with somebody, and it's like, okay, that's cool and random. I guess that, you know, the terrifying mascot of Iron Maiden plays board games now. And it's like the only problem. Yeah, why not? Is that the only problem I have with Stratego, and it is actually less on the album version. On the single version, and I'm honestly, I can't be imagining this it is very weirdly mixed, and you got a lot, Bruce Dickinson's voice is buried like for sections of this song in the mix. It's, because everything is going on around him, and it's sort of like, I guess it's sort of as a musical effect, as a sort of a dramatic effect, I can understand, because it's sort of, the idea of, this voice getting lost in this chaos of, the band around him. But it's sort of like, it's something they seem to have gone back on between the single version and the album version for no apparent reason. And yeah, I mean, it's okay, but it's like, again, this is the song I think will probably end up in this and the next song I think will end up in the set list for a long period, because they're a good duo. But essentially, this sort of tells the story of this sort of, this master of war, this sort of non-mortal bizarre madman who sort of, is teaching the art of war. And, it's sort of, it's again, it's sort of Iron Maiden doing their big narrative. You could almost imagine this sort of, the visual. This lends itself very well to the visual of, the two songs going together. And then we have Writing on the Wall, which is basically the track this album was teased with, and is probably the least Iron Maiden-y soundtrack on the album, because it sort of leans more into essentially sort of bluesy rock. I mean, during the recording of this, I think Dickinson and Harris both sort of said that there's an influence from, of all people, Jethro Tull on this. Those masters of actually beating Metallica with the flute, the original heavy metal instrument, as I believe Jethro Tull put out in 1989 when they beat And Justice for All for Best Heavy Metal Album. Yeah, that happened. That's why we have different. Things. Anyway, so Writing on the Wall, I think, is the perfect first single for this album. There's enough of Iron Maiden in it, the traditional sound in it, but there's also, there's this new element. This isn't going to be the same record as, exactly the same Iron Maiden. This is sort of obviously where the album does also lean into its more progressive tendencies, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of also, it's also just, hey, Iron Maiden are back. Iron Maiden, you got to consider that in the recording of this period, Bruce Dickinson has been recovering from a fairly severe mouth cancer, and was doing most of the recording of this album on a broken leg, which it's like, and it's sort of like this idea. But it's sort of interesting to look at not only the way that this album, that Writing on the Walls musically sounds, but also in terms of its music video, because obviously this is the first element of the album that we get. And yeah, this is sort of like, it's a very interesting, whilst it is about the apocalypse, it's also like, you get this line, once our empire's glorious, but now our empire's gone, against this visual of tattered, trousered, businessmen in Union Jack things, and you're going, okay, Bruce, you did vote for Brexit. Is this, your realization that you voted for the wrong thing? It
could also just be the people who made the music video. I mean, they said it's based on an idea by Bruce Dickinson.
Yeah.
I should specify where they did make a music video that I did see. It's an animated music video that's about the apocalypse, and it's like post-apocalyptic. All of these people are dying in the desert, and everything is poisoned, except for this one place where only the rich people can go. Yeah. And they have this long band of people, which includes like the fat American leader driving a car. Yeah. And Pink Floyd characters, which are faceless British numpsies, and who are wearing tattered trousers that have the Union Jack on them. Yeah. And they all go to this club that is led by this guy who, like, apparently lives off the life forces of others. Yep.
Who is a blonde-haired, rather corpulent sort of figure. I wonder who he could possibly be based on, ? It's like, I wonder who he could be. A man starting with the letter T, perhaps.
But, But also, there is a blonde-haired numbskull running the British government too. It could also be.
It could be any one of a number of blonde heads.
Yeah, but and then the four horsemen of the apocalypse
on motorcycle
come riding in and just wreck their shit, letting no, death doesn't come. You don't get your escape pod, or you don't get your escape place where you can live. Death comes for all, and it is a very the heavy metal, graphic novel animated series, or liquid television short. It is it very much fits into that 80s, 90s subculture animated video.
Yeah, you could honestly drop this into the middle of a new heavy metal film. Obviously the French metal hurlant sort of American pulp comic, and just go, that totally works. I honestly wish they'd done more music videos for this album, because it would have been interesting to sort of do an entirely visual album. But there we go. That's how. But no, and obviously it also unveils via CG, very impressive CG, Samurai Eddie, because it's like, hey, it's this guy in a cloak, but he's also, it's Samurai Eddie. There he is, grinning like a maniac. There he is.
And then meanwhile in the background, the British numpsies are getting their heads exploded by insects and, other, very metal deaths.
Yeah. It's fucking awesome. Go watch it now.
It's good.
It's good. And it's sort of like, it very much sort of sets the scene for this album, this idea of, the lost grandeur, the sort of the lost battle, the sense which I think sort of, I guess is sort of the musical, concept of, Senjutsu. It's this very much, a lot of Iron Maiden albums are, here is this stuff that's happened, but, we'll rise victorious out of this. This is very much sort of like, well, no, this is the sort of the aftermath of war. This is the chaos and the mess that's left afterwards. I guess in a sort of the, this is an album of empires gone, not empires falling.
And then we have, Lost in a Lost World, where it's about living in a land that has been defeated, and it feels like your heritage is leaving, and you're just, wandering without a purpose, and it's it's a Harris song, so it is one of the longer on the album.
Yeah.
And it feels like you could cut it into 4 different songs. Like there's the kind of folktale beginning, and then, the guitars kicked in, and then there's, another hard version of it, then it goes back to the folksy part.
Yeah, and
but it's a different kind of.
Yeah. And I think Harris sort of, this is the thing, there were so many ideas going on in this song, but Harris manages to keep these together and develop, deliver probably the best chorus on this Lost in a Lost World sort of section. This sort of, where Bruce Dickinson is doing the typical, air raidy, really high vocal on it. Is sort of like, you're holding this together. This is 4 different songs sort of thrashing around inside this thing, and you got this all going in one direction, and it's propulsive, and it's, it leans more heavily than I think a lot of the other tracks into, the older Maiden sound, without sort of losing that sort of that very intricateness that has, made itself known in the more recent records. And it's sort of like, I think, again, this is sort of, an indication that, the way that Maiden write is sort of very, songs are very interesting. This is a British band of very, very white, very, very London-centric people, who, yes, might be grammar school educated in some case, but are, the sort of people who grew up on, the idea of pulp comics of cowboys and Indians, doing this surprisingly sensitive and this surprisingly, empathetic take. I mean, Run to the Hills, yes, is sort of like, but Run to the Hills, it is just sort of, the peck and parish pulpishness of, the destruction of, Native American land, whereas this is sort of like, this is actually really quite I hesitate to use the word, but it is quite moving in a way, because it's it's almost like Maiden are coming back to the idea of the sort of the area they did look at in Run of the Hills and go, these are the people left behind by the the destruction and the chaos of this.
Mm-hmm. Although, again, it is a very British, because they're talking about, Americans taking all the Native American land and, run for the hills. But then there's Great Britain. Let's talk about your colonialism.
Let's open that particular
drop the list that falls to the floor.
With a heavy thunk. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, no, absolutely. And I think that's the sort of the thing, it's... I couldn't imagine, Iron Maiden doing a song like going, yeah, do you know what? We did some really sort of things in, Africa and India and, the Boxer Rebellion. Well, that was a thing that we may not have been involved with, yeah, oops. Yeah, and it's sort of the thing. It is a very, and even it's sort of very revisionist. It's less boys' own than it has been, than the band used to be. Yeah, the sort of, songs about, destroying the women, and, the sort of, it's less, it's more tempered, but these are, guys in their 60s, writing the sort of basically, essentially the same sort of songs that have been writing since, the 1980s, and it's like, great, but it's sort of like, but again, do you come to Iron Maiden for that sort of, for anything other than a template that the band, essentially elaborate on and make little tweaks to every so often?
Yeah, it feels like they're a band to steal from and then put your own story in it.
Precisely, yeah. I mean,
they're like the deep breath of people, like I've said, like, it goes from, theatrical metal bands like rock and metal bands like the Proto Men, who are, it's a rock opera about Mega Man, to like, the late 80s bands where it's, I'm going to totally sleep with my teacher on a muscle car, and my teacher just happens to be a bottle blonde who looks really hot on the album cover or something. Just that kind of music. And so, they have that breath, and I think, the thing that doesn't attract me is also why they have been so influential, because it's just like, oh yeah, we can use this and we can put our stuff, and it's just like, Iron Maiden, I mean, they're definitely about things, but you can definitely kind of scrape off their lyrics, and you can kind of put your own, you kind of can make it about your own thing.
Yeah.
And nobody will notice besides like music critics and who gives a shit about them.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, the number of bands that influenced by Iron Maiden is basically a who's who of rock. I mean, you've got bands as eclectic as My Chemical Romance. I mean, Gerard Way regards the opening two tracks of the seminal Iron Maiden album, Live After Death, as the reason he's a musician. Ex-Japan. Basically any heavy metal band worth their salt are basically going, yeah, we might have cribbed a few things off Iron Maiden. And that's the thing, they are a band, they could do the legacy sort of circuit as bands like Deep Purple do, bands like Black Sabbath did to an extent. But I think there's something quite, quite refreshing that every so often they go back into the studio and go, no, this album we're going to go even harder and even longer and even more, do, interesting new things on each record. And I think that's that's the role that Iron Maiden play. They are, the release of an Iron Maiden album is, compared to basically every other band, but save for Metallica, it is an event. It's sort of, holy shit, there's a new Iron Maiden album. Anyway, let's move on to a song about John Constantine, which I wouldn't know if it was John Constantine. This is this is like I have to be honest, I've had to listen to this track a few times in isolation because it goes so quickly that it's like, this is parked between, the time between Lost in Lost World, which is 10 minutes, and Days of Future Past, which is 9 minutes, and it's like, wait, there it went. Okay.
There's a song there, and you might have to carry weight on this because I do not remember what Days of Future Past sounds like. I kind of remember what the Time Machine. I remember what the beginning of the Time Machine sounds like, and then I don't know. It's like when you get into the middle of this album, it's just like you have already gone through about 30 minutes of music.
Yeah.
And you've got a long way to go, so it's just
keep going.
Your ears are kind of settled in, and these aren't the featured tracks.
No, these are like I can't imagine Iron Maiden ever promoting going. Yeah, we're gonna release Days of Future Past as the first single, because it's just gone. It's just there. It isn't there. It's gone. It's gone. I can't actually remember anything about this song other than it's about John Constantine, apparently. And I remember the intro being quite good. That's about it. There's like, the intros, and then you go, oh, hang on a minute. This is now the Time Machine. This isn't Days of Future Past. Where's it gone?
Yeah.
There it goes. Yeah, solid song. Time Machine is the one I have the problem with. And it's like...
Okay.
It's the length of it more than anything. It's sort of like, you are basically, you have the, Days of Future Past, which is you, and then you essentially have, from this point onward, if we exclude Days of Future Past, because essentially, I'm trying to remember the flipping track of it. You have got this sort of chunk of a nearly 10-minute song, a nearly 8-minute song, and then 3 songs which range in difference. And it's sort of like, I think this, for me, is the one that sort of gets lost a little bit in the mix. And I think this should have been either later in the album to sort of break up the sort of the Harris trio a little bit, or needed something cut off it, or needed something added to it. Because again, it sort of floats a little bit too much into, this is an Iron Maiden song, we're Iron Maiden, here is 7 minutes of Iron Maiden. And it's a very much an also-ran song.
And I think the problem with that is also kind of the lyric side. I know that's me just repeating myself, but it's also, this is about a man who is like, I told you about my time machine, and I'll tell you everywhere I've been, and I'll tell you everything, and then he tells him what kind of man he is. And then the second thing is, like, I've seen so many things. It's like, well, why don't you tell us about some of these things you've done? Or why don't you tell us, give us some details. You're just, at this point, you are just crazy Doc Brown ranting about stuff, and like, you're not saying things.
Yeah, the guitar solo on this is very good. That's all I remember. This song is the sort of very trebled out guitar solo, and this very, very almost piercing sound, which is unusual for Maiden guitar solos. But yeah, it's like the lost in a lot. I mean, I'm going to be blunt here. You could have cut Days of Future Past in the Time Machine and made this, a four a side record, and I don't think it would have lost very much, unfortunately. They're not bad. Yeah. They are good tracks, but if you wanted to,
you could have just made it a "Be Here Now" single disc.
Yeah, you could have, or even if you insist on doing the full thing, perhaps I don't know, move the Time Machine onto the start of the third disc. I don't know, because it's sort of it's really, as I said, it's me nitpicking, to be honest. I think it's a good song, but it loses itself a little bit in the sort of the mix. And then we get to the Darkest Hour, which is Iron Maiden singing about their favourite thing in the world, World War II. Yeah, and this is a good song. This is it's that old style of Maiden song. Here is something about history, namely World War II. Here is some stuff about Churchill. I did Hitler for some reason. That would have been a very, very different song.
And apparently, Churchill would often see a black dog, and that's why there's the black dog in the pre-chorus lyrics.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of like, particularly considering, Bruce Dickinson has, been suffering from cancer, and it's like, you start to sort of, think about your legacy, and, you start to have, thoughts, as obviously, of depression, going, hang on a minute, I could die here, it's very much sort of, and again, it's sort of, it's a subject that Maiden have sort of approached before, but again, there's this sort of, it's this sort of post what a lot of Maiden songs tend to be. Here is war and battle. And it's like, well, here's probably one of the most important people in British military history, sort of reflecting on their legacy, and it's it's interesting to sort of do it. This is the flip side of the jingoism of things like Aces High and the like. Going, well, hang on a minute, after all, he's just a man who was just in the right place at the right time, and he struggled like everybody struggles with with his own life, and it's sort of like,
and Twitter will absolutely tell you about the failures of Winston Churchill.
Oh yeah, and it's like I'm not defending it, but again, if you come to Iron Maiden expecting hot takes on British military history. This isn't the band. This isn't the band. This, frankly, isn't the genre. Because even if you look at bands like Sabaton, who are this band who sing about nothing but war, sort of bellicose, sort of bellicose quality. Again, it's heavy metal bread and butter. Every heavy metal band is going to have their album or song or concept about war, because And it's sort of like, it might be a different way of, Iron Maiden singing about war, say, compared to, something like Disposable Heroes off Master of Puppets. But, bands love heavy metal. War is basically one of the staples of heavy metal. And it's sort of interesting to see Maiden sort of start to reflect, of, the legacy, the aftermath of war. As I think this album really is, an album about the aftermath of war. And the legacy of war compared to a lot of their discography, and nowhere is this better seen than in Death of the Celts, which is, I believe, your favourite track on the album.
It is, but as we've discussed when you got me in to listen to Norwegian black metal, like the best tracks I liked from that were when they mixed the metal with folk music, and since it's the Death of the Celts, there is nothing more like mixed in with folk music than this track, and it's a good 10 minutes of it, and it doesn't get interrupted like Days of Future Past will have that acoustic entry, and then they'll kick in the main song, and then they'll kick in the second song, and then it'll go back to the outro. But this one doesn't do that. It's mostly stays at the level it is at the beginning.
Yeah.
And, I really enjoy those. They're, musically extremely very well done. And, this is like 10 minutes of that, so which is very nice for me, especially when it comes to, this probably could have been placed in the middle of the album just to break up the tracks, because, I'm not going to say all of these tracks sound alike, because they don't, but they do kind of essentially blend together. Just in the same, they're at the same tempo and they go at the same force, and that's probably why After Lost in the Lost World, Days of Future Past, and the Time Machine kind of blend together, because they're at that same tempo. They do. Not the exact same things, but they're similar enough that you don't notice which one's on at the moment.
Absolutely, which is why I think Writing the Wall is the other really standout, because they both lean into this more bluesy, more acoustic-y, sense. Because Writing the Wall is dominated by this, by the acoustic instruments as well. But the Death of the Celts is just classic Iron Maiden telling a ripping yarn of the death of the Celts. Again, it's sort of it's sort of Dickinson's voice goes into a really interesting sort of tone on this, compared to the more bellicose tone that I guess has become the as he's well known, he's known as the air raid siren. This is very much more gentle, and this is almost bardic, and frankly, if we're going to be honest with it.
And there's no chorus. There are. From looking at the lyrics, there are 12 verses and a bridge, but there is no chorus, and that makes sense for this song, because it's about mourning and it's about remembrance, and it's not about it's like it's about dying. So there's no triumphant chorus. There's no, power. It's just, a eulogy almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we get to the Parchment, which starts off in the same sort of tone, but then kind of veers off a little bit. And it is also the longest track on the album. And yeah, this is the other one you don't like, isn't it?
Yeah, it's too much of the same song for a long time. And I know I just said that about Death of the Kells, but it's just this, it's this, like you said, chugging song about war for 12 minutes, and I am not.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair,
I'm trying not to get to say too much because this album does understand war has a cost, but it's like my first reaction to Iron Maiden, like listening to their old stuff, was like this is a very 15-year-old who has never seen a battle view of war as he draws it in their little notebook.
Yeah,
like it is this totally awesome thing. And that was kind of my reaction to Iron Maiden, and that's not my style. I have a brother in the military.
Yeah.
I have like seen and I've heard like individual stories about war, and it is not.
Yeah, it's not
even
what
at
Iron
the
Maiden
scale.
thinking.
There is like an individual cost that some people just can't even spend their whole lives not being able to express, and that I feel is missing in a lot of Iron Maiden work. But then again, you don't come for it. It's a preferential thing.
Yeah.
I don't prefer that. And if you like it, that is absolutely fine.
Which is fair enough.
The Parchment feels like, the most that kind of song.
Yeah, it very much leans back heavily, and probably most heavily of every track onto this, into, the typical 80s Iron Maiden thing, but just on this maximalist scale. There's another track on the Book of Souls which basically does exactly the same thing a little bit better, which is the Red and the Black, which is nearly 14 minutes long. And it's sort of this is something that Maiden have done before more successfully, and it's solid. It has its place on the record. But, this either needs an edit job of cutting it down a little bit, or something else musically going. I mean, frankly, if it had been, if this had been the one the band said, no, let's do this acoustically, and let's, really do interesting, something musically interesting with this, I think you'd have less of a problem with it. But the problem is it's sort of, it is prime Iron. It's like Iron Maiden 101. And it's sort of like, I like this track, but it's sort of like, I will agree, it's too long. It's simply too long.
I will check out on this song in the midway and then look through some stuff, like look on Twitter or something, and then come back and it's like, oh, it's still going. It's still going.
Which the Red and the Black also does, but the Red and the Black has the best section of any Iron Maiden song in my opinion, which is this sort of nearly 3-minute outro of just whoa, 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 this is the part where you, the Iron Maiden fan, sing along with your hand or phone in the air, waving it around like a lunatic, because this is the part of the song that Iron Maiden have written specifically for that particular purpose. Yeah. And the problem is also it's sandwiched between these other monster cuts that do the sort of the big sweeping epic, concept a lot better. Which brings us to the final track on the album, Hell on Earth, which is, for my money, the best thing on this record. Which is this sort
it's good.
It's basically like, and again I can see this appearing in set lists towards, or if not as a, as the final song, as the sort of the thing before the first encore, but when you and then the band come back out and play all the old stuff, and it's the scale of this is something to behold. This has like dueling guitar solos, it's got everything an Iron Maiden a final track on an Iron Maiden album needs. It's the three members of the three guitarists of the band, working off each other perfectly, and on this sort of this biblical scale of the end of all things. And it's sort of the thing, you've got to realise these guys are in their 60s. You know, if this is the way, you know, if this is the final Iron Maiden album, this is the last thing the band ever produced, you know, there are worse notes to go out on than that.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it might be, just because it's, you know, it's the aftermath of everything and reflecting on everything that has passed.
Yeah, it's sort of like,
and
you know,
just you're praying for the future, but you're not expecting it.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it's sort of, you know, I think it finishes. This had to be the final track on the album. I don't think anything else works. The only other track I could think of having is having Lost on the Lost World, but Lost in the Lost World ends the album. It would have ended the album on such a, you know, a somber note that I think you've got to have, you know, you've got to have your final you know, your final moment, you know, your big closer on this, you know, to this moment of blazing glory on the album. And there we have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are still 20 minutes under the running time of the album.
Somehow. I mean, I think we need to sort of generally talk about this album in the round, because, like,
yeah,
I feel the Iron Maiden are a band I adore. I need to see Iron Maiden at some point live. Just pointing out, if anyone wants to subscribe to the Patreon and give me money to do that, we'll talk about the Patreon later. But no, I this is the thing, you know, this is a band that sort of, you know, I understand, you know, that Iron Maiden are a bunch of guys in their 60s who, you know, were probably the hottest shit in the world, you know, 30 years ago. But I feel also they're a band that haven't, you know, particularly since, you know, their reunion in sort of 2000, and, you know, this is the fact, you know, this version of this post-reunion version of Iron Maiden has now been going for longer than, you know, they originally did in, you know, the 1970s and 80s, and it's like, you know, this is, you know, a band who are not only probably the biggest heavy metal band in the world, but sort of, you know, are this incredible sort of, you know, 40-year sort of epic of a group, you know. And I'm gonna be blunt, I actually think, and this is where Digital Fruit starts getting thrown at me, this is the best album Iron Maiden have done since they reunited. There's, you know, there's a cohesion, there's a sort of size, a scale to it, you know. There is, you know, this sense of, you know, everything coalesces on this record. You know, we've talked about some tracks I think are, you know, needed an edit job, but, you know, as a whole, as an album that you can listen to cover to cover, I don't think Iron Maiden have got much much, or at least of their reunion stuff to sort of come up against this. This is just an album I mean I bought this album, which should indicate everything you need to know about it in this age of digital things, and, you know, nobody ever buying music anymore. I bought this album.
Well, I suppose that leaves it to me. I did really like the album. It's, you know, I've said many times Iron Maiden is not my thing, but as, you know, listening to this album, I did really, you know, appreciate that they are this old and still going this hard and still adding things to their music. They're still, you know, they're still learning, they're still putting new stuff in, and they are still going extremely hard, which, regardless of whether most bands are really trying hard or not, because I do believe, you know, even the laziest ones are actually trying, but it's just like sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Like when we talked about Medicine at Midnight for the Foo Fighters, it feels like these were songs they couldn't figure out how to make work, but they put them together on an album in the middle of a pandemic. So
yeah,
it's like I don't believe the Foo Fighters aren't trying. It's just this time it didn't work, and they've been getting more and more like they're dads, and they're getting older, and they're getting separate from what made them work. But Iron Maiden is, you know, they're expanding. It doesn't feel like they're getting detached from what makes them work, and that's what I think makes this album work. And this feels like if this album had been released in, the 80s or in their heydays, I mean, you wouldn't, think one bit about it.
No. I would, as I said, but I would certainly say this is the best of, the reunion stuff. Frankly, sections of this are as good as the band have ever been. This ranks up there with, the band's best 80s output. I think, obviously it sort of leans a little bit heavier into what we expect of modern music now, which is basically, if the thing isn't full, if you're not basically picking up an album that's cover to cover, 2 discs these days, you're going, where's the rest of it? But it's sort of yeah. I think this is a sterling addition to the Iron Maiden discography.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the only blight against it is not even its fault. It's I listen to something that is absolutely my jam, and I just listen to one of the essential albums of some of my favorite genre. And one day we'll talk about that, but I really wanted to listen to that far more than I wanted to listen to this. Yeah. So that kind of hindered it, but that is not Iron Maiden's fault. This album is absolutely fine, and yeah, it does have that definite cohesion you look for in great albums.
Yeah.
I am not the judge to whether, this is the great album, because, my stuff against, Iron Maiden storytelling and, what and how they're, about is not my thing, but that is strictly preferential. And, you could put a lot of my issues, like, thematically against a lot of bands. Like you said, most metal bands are about war, because that's how one of the few things you can get that big about. You can't, like, get super epic about meeting a girl on a train or something like that. So there's only so many things that are this huge.
Yeah. And if it's not real war, it's fictional war, because you basically, like every other heavy metal band, decided to read Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of, it's Iron Maiden. What else could you, it is an Iron Maiden album that does exactly what it says on the tin. It's 80 minutes plus of Iron Maiden doing, probably the best album they've done in 2 decades. It's enjoyable. There's not a dud track on it. Everything is just, the only thing I would say against this record is this would have been really great last year in the middle of the pandemic, but there we go. It's sort of like, could you imagine this dropping in the middle of the pandemic and just people going, oh my God, finally, this is exactly what we needed in, the middle of this horrifying this horrifying loss of, thing. And yeah, it's I'm gonna be biased in the opposite direction in that I love this band. This band is one of my favorite heavy metal bands. I have spent nothing, essentially, the last month, but while we've been preparing for this episode, listening to not very much else. So my ears will thank me for listening to other stuff shortly. This is just a great record. I mean, I bought it. I bought it, and at this age, where everything is disposable, where everything is, a copy of a copy, where, we're coming out of the other side of one of probably the worst things that, the worst periods of time that I think anyone listening to this event has ever or will ever experience. This is one of the best bands in the world, going back to exactly what they do best, which is making bloody good music.
Okay, I think that about wraps it up, and we are still 10 minutes under the runtime for the actual album.
Quickly, let's all sing Hell on Earth. No, anyway, So we will obviously be returning to our usual pastures with Redline and DJ Shadow shortly. Those episodes should be coming up fairly quickly, because Redline is a film and DJ Shadow is an album, and we're not sort of listening to an 80-minute, masterclass in heavy metal. But if you want us to make...
The Outsider is like about 70 minutes of 4 different albums.
That's gonna be a fun one. It's just like dirty southern rap and turntablism and other stuff. This will be another interesting music episode. But if you want to, schedule, you want to us to talk about, anything, Joe would prefer it's not more Iron Maiden for a while, please. We're not going straight into talking about Live After Death, although I would love to do that. You can.
It's fine.
It's fine.
Just,
if
you want to give us money, sure. I am down with whatever, except for like a small list of things.
Yes, which we will publish on the Patreon at some point.
Yeah, we have ultra high goals for certain things, like Pinkerton.
Give us money. Give us money. If you want us to talk about Pinkerton, give us money. If Rivers Cumber
now that is giving me money to make me torture.
Yeah.
Or to make me suffer, I should say.
Absolutely. Should you want to make us suffer by subjecting us to Pinkerton, or if you want us to talk about music, anime, or frankly anything else we get our grubby little mitts on, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com//The Thom and Joe Show. Tom is spelled with a H, like Tom York from Radiohead. Or if you want to follow our exploits on Twitter, we can be found on Twitter at NotSoFinalProd. So there we are. That's us. This has been Iron Maiden's Senjutsu, and we will see you next time on the next Thom and Joe Show. I'm Tom.
I'm Joe.
And we will see you later. Goodbye.
Okay, time to go wander graveyards and think about the past for 80 minutes.
Pass me my bass, Joe.